Hello and welcome to our second Climate Week from climatedebate.co.uk. Excuse me, what a great start. And it's the 13th of July, 2023. We're going to try a new format this evening, and I'll be joined by Ed Rennie, Climate Debate UK co-founder, and joining us after that will be Alan Miller, founder of the Together Declaration, and later on Catherine McBride, economist, is going to be joining us to talk about the economics of net zero. We still haven't properly sorted out the gremlins that are preventing us having some proper audience interaction, some Q&A. We hope to have your faces up on this screen at some point too, but we still haven't managed to sort that out. So bear with us. And with all that said, I think we can go on to the news, which this week has been a bit like last week, a rather dramatic. Across the world, we seem to be experiencing extremely high temperatures. It worried the World Meteorological Office so much that they had a press conference about it. And this has apparently been the warmest, on June has been the warmest on record. And this month, the current temperatures are also the hottest ever recorded. This follows the Met Office's announcement that it was the UK's warmest June ever, and that was before June was even over, which surprised many people who had been wearing jumpers, sitting under duvets and having their central heating on for a good part of that month. But nonetheless, the World Meteorological Organization thought it best to draw some scary charts and have a very long press conference with some geeks. The problem, of course, really arises out of the El Nino cycle. And so rather than there being lots of extra warmth, which is sort of the implication of temperatures rising typically, what we see is on the right here, different sea surface temperatures, and this is, these are different patterns. This is weather essentially, albeit not annually on an annual cycle, on an El Nino cycle, and this is disturbing the normal course of recording the world's temperature. So it's a bit like moving the thermometers. The whole world is slightly shifted for the duration of an El Nino cycle. So this gives alarmists a lot of opportunities to sort of complain about very, very high temperature readings. But as we've seen, that these are mostly sea surface temperatures, not land surface temperatures. It's not as if the whole planet has heated up by 3 or 4 degrees, as would otherwise seem to be the implication. So all of this pinning problems onto or using El Nino as an opportunity to advance alarmism is especially silly, because it's very likely to come back and bite them on the backside. So, for example, when last week, as we covered, there was a lot of very excited commentary about the possibility that there had been, it was the warmest temperatures ever recorded for a few days. Very soon after that, Climate Reanalyzer had to backpedal on these claims. If I can get the slide. to work. They had to say quite quickly after this story had gone global that that this data should not be taken as an official observational record, or even an observational record at all. And they were very, very bizarrely saying that it wasn't the Climate Reanalyzer, the system that produced these high temperatures, is not a model. Of course, it's a model. These are statistical models that try and interpret what data there does exist to make an inference about the globe as a whole, the temperature of the entire planet. So all these kind of statements, these alarming statements that get made and then they get withdrawn. All they do is add more mud to the water, and they excite comments such as Ed Miliband's here, that these record-breaking temperatures are a stark reminder that climate breakdown is a real and present danger, not a distant threat. Well, Ed Miliband is just wrong. It's inevitable that these sort of dramatic, making these kind of dramatic statements based on unfolding scientific factoids is going to lead to Ed Miliband getting himself into a mess. He is confusing temperatures with emergencies. Yes, it's hot. No, it's not an emergency. I very much suggest that Ed watches our film, Why There Is No Climate Crisis, and we go through all of the facts. And it's very, very important, we think, to sort of separate these things out, that temperature is not a crisis. So if you head over to our website, climatedebate.co.uk, we actually try to do this. We've created a map, an air war map, if you like, a schematic of the climate debate. And on the left, you see global warming, which we don't think there's particularly much controversy about, and that goes through climate change. There's a little bit more evidence for climate change, but there's very little evidence for climate impacts and climate crisis. So you can't really conflate global warming and climate crisis without making a huge load of errors, as Ed has. It might be warmer, might even indicate a bit of climate change, but very little evidence there then exists for climate impacts, and there's still zero evidence of a climate crisis. We do not see rises in infectious diseases. We do not see declines in agricultural productivity. We do not see increases in poverty, in conflict, or in property damage, or environmental refugees and environmental migration. So back to the news, or not quite. Just to add to that a bit, the IPCC in fact agrees with us. We pointed this out in last week's show. There still exists very little evidence of second order global warming consequences in science. You have to start building very complicated and sensitive models in order to be able to make statements about the effect of anthropogenic CO2 on the Earth's systems. Anyhow, oblivious to all that, of course, two old men meet in a massive palace to talk about climate change, as if they knew anything about anything at all. What's striking about this event, this discussion between Joe and Charles, is that some journalists are picking up on the fact that Rishi Sunak has been sort of out of the picture. And so the king is being credited with what the PM should have been doing, i.e. the king is doing political business. So a long time, a royal protocol obviously forbids this. And for a very long time, the king, the monarchy was supposed to stay out of politics. They were supposed to, be above that sort of thing. And for the most of the duration of environmentalism, that has happened. And because people haven't seen that climate change, that environmentalism and climate change alarmism are ideological. But they are ideological. They're as ideological as any early 20th century movement, any of the isms that dominated in the early to mid 20th century. And it's going to be Charles who's going to come off worse for his failure to recognize that fact. And so here's Rishi. People we pointed this out last week. This is what's upsetting a lot of the Green blob and causing people to sort of look more to the king. It does seem as if in the UK and across Europe, the net zero agenda is somewhat going floppy, if it isn't dead on arrival. There's the reduction here of the £11.6 billion climate pledge. So this is only going to get worse. Nonetheless, here is the spectacle.
Thank you to the both of you for having that telephone call.
Yeah. What I'm not sure what Grant Shapps is saying there, actually, because I can't get the sound right.
About 1% of philanthropic money goes into climate finance right now, and 2% of institutional money. And the idea of bringing all of us together, which is what we've done this morning, to discuss how we can better serve the world through climate finance, is something which we are appreciative of.
Right, so much waffle from Grant Shapps, who's the Minister with the brief for climate and energy security. Earlier in the week, he was going to be launching the Great British Nuclear Project, whatever that was. And this was seemingly, according to leaks, going to be giving us a gigawatt of new nuclear power per year out to 2050. The leaks obviously didn't come with any explanation as to where the money was going to come from or how much money was going to be involved. But doubtlessly, that may have been a cause in the delay, the unforeseen circumstances which prevented that announcement today. Moving on, another failure of UK energy policy before it had even started. Residents of Whitby, the one in the northwest, not the Whitby of the northeast, it's got to be pointed out, have decided they don't want to be hydrogen guinea pigs, and rightly so, I would argue. A hydrogen experiment has no basis for going forward without causing quite a lot of disruption to people's lives. It's certainly not a mature technology that I would want to commit to at this stage. And now that Whitby has pulled out, the good people of the northeast in Redcar, which is the second guinea pig hydrogen town, are also thinking about whether they want to go ahead with this experiment too. So there's endless literature and organizations that have been singing the praises of hydrogen and saying how that's the future for many years. I've come across so many books or reports that are inches thick explaining how hydrogen's going to work, and it just doesn't seem to be getting off the ground. It's just another carbon and capture storage project, just another part of the net zero agenda that does not seem to be able to get off its feet. The whole thing seems to be stuck. In the same way that Cardiff Council's green bin collecting trucks are stuck, and the council there is going to have to go back to diesel, it says. Don't worry though, because the good people of Salisbury, a lovely place, beloved of Russian spies, are going to be denied the freedom to put hanging flower baskets in their town because it's got something to do with climate change. God knows what, you're going to have to go and find out. Meanwhile, the silliest thing I found this week was this video from the World Economic Forum, who believes that these turnstiles can generate something like a whopping 300 megawatts of electricity. I'm not kidding. You'll see it there. While that video rolls in, I'll introduce Ed to the stream. Oh no, there he is. Hello, Ed. What do you reckon to all this news?
Well, I think it's just it's interesting. One of the people viewing pointed out that they've got to have something to talk about at COP28. And I think that's right. So a lot of this stuff is kind of pushing towards that. And the stuff with the temperatures, as we know, is just it's complete garbage, basically. And it's interesting. I was reading this week that one of the measures of temperatures started in 1979. So that's one of the key ones they're using. And of course, that's pretty convenient because the last really, really hot summer was 1976. So,
So I think the point issue there is there's only been a satellite record since the late 1970s, and so it's very difficult to marry all these different data sets up, especially within a couple of hours of them having been captured from presumably from satellites and digital thermometers. But it's a good point.
And of course, there's the urban heat effect, which on the quiet, climate alarmists will concede, but of course when they'll admit it from the conversation when they're talking about record-breaking temperatures, as they clearly did last year.
That's right. Yes, I mean, even last week we were discussing the fact that they're adjusting temperatures from 50 years ago still today. Some people think there's something nefarious going on with the adjustments of all the past temperature sets, but whether there is or isn't. It shows you what a very complex task all this processing is. It just seems a bit sort of hasty to try and put that to make these claims on the hoof, as it were.
Sure, and the then Prince Charles really ran with that right in the middle of that 48 hours of hot temperatures last year. The now king was then saying, "Well, look, here you are," as if 2 days of very hot weather meant that suddenly everything that he believes about climate change is true, and and he's trying to sort of just make appearances and not say too much, but he's being political, and that's dangerous for the monarchy, but it also speaks to his lack of understanding of what's actually going on and the critical analysis that you would hope that the head of state would make were they going to say anything at all or appear to support anything.
What did you make of the web video of each passenger generated 0.2 watts of energy? I don't think they know what a watt is. What a watt is a rate. This happens very frequently. A watt is a rate at which energy is I guess produced. And they go on to sort of suggest that if all of the stations had these devices, then it could power a whole train line. I mean, it's just nutty. they clearly, I mean, they don't know what they're talking about, and but nonetheless, they put themselves in the position of the people who sort of should know what they're talking about, as if they did. But
well, no, and also one can imagine the amount of energy and power and finance that's used to create something like that, and how much it would cost to install across any transport network. I mean, it's just absurd.
Truly nuts. Before we go on to the topic you and I were going to talk about, should we just watch this from Dale Vince? And any questions, or is it question time? I think it's called last week. Oh, okay, there we go.
One of the ways that we could pay for more public service is to impose national insurance on capital gains tax and the taxes that rich people pay. Because capital gains tax is just 20%. And Rishi Sunak made £2 million last year and paid £400,000 in tax. Whereas if you're a nurse, you're paying an effective rate of tax of nearly 50%. And how can that be right? But if you add national insurance to capital gains tax, we would raise tens of billions of pounds a year, which we can spend on public services.
Okay.
So there's Dale Vince, and he's pretending to be Robin Hood again. But notice that he's the green industrialist that he pretends to be. He's not actually talking about producing more economic growth to produce more money for the Treasury. He's talking about redistribution, and then he comes back and sort of goes, no, I made £1 million for Just Stop Oil. So he's actually actively supporting a degrowth agenda there, and of course the Labour Party, which is what we're going to talk about.
Yes.
This is what we talked about last week. There seems to be something of a rift developing in the Labour Party. Rachel Reeves doesn't necessarily want to go ahead with Ed Miliband's 28 billion thing, and then it looks like somebody has briefed against Ed Miliband to the Times, or briefed against Keir Starmer, saying that he hates tree huggers. What do you make of that?
Well, it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I suspect. I mean, I think at the first of the year, Peter Mandelson put out an article that was entitled, you know, we don't want Labour to be kind of posing as like Greta Thunberg. And it's interesting that he said that, and there was an article in the Times, and this has been briefed to the Times. So one wonders if this is something Keir Starmer said to Peter Mandelson. Well, there you go. You have it. You've brought it up there. So obviously, on one side of this Labour divide, you've got Rachel Reeves and Peter Mandelson. On the other side, you've got the current General Secretary of the GMB versus the TUC. And obviously, you've got Ed Miliband's alarmism. And you, of course, no idea where Starmer stands. One suspects that he leans towards the Peter Mandelson position, but that it's just too convenient for him to have Ed Miliband in place. Because, I mean, I suspect that, as seems likely, and they get into power, I think he may remove Ed Miliband after winning an election. He may even remove him beforehand. But I suspect after would be more likely, just because obviously he wants to hoover up as many Green votes as he can, and then only disappoint them if and when he gets into government. So I think this divide is interesting, but it also speaks to the fact that there are people in the Labour Party who aren't completely mad about this stuff. And the General Secretary of the GMB is one of those.
Well, we'll come back to him, but the GMB guy. But it's also Starmer's position on ULEZ is also flip-flopping, as Alan Miller, who we'll be speaking to in a few minutes, I hope, if he turns up. Hurry up, Alan. It's a point Alan pointed out on Twitter the other day, with the, you know, Starmer's not making a clear statement on whether he does support candidates who are critical of ULEZ or not. But like he seems to be saying ULEZ is necessary. But if it's necessary, can it be expensive? If it's expensive, can it be necessary? So he seems to be trying to pay it always.
Yes, and I think you know he has a record of this on all these issues, where he flip-flops. He tells the audience of kind of the idealistic lefties what they want to hear. You know, from all sorts of things, critical race theory, the trans stuff, and you name it. And then as soon as he feels he can get away with it, he moves to a more, if you like, centrist moderate position. So should we you know, obviously ULEZ can be added to that list of U-turns and hypocrisy and inconsistency.
So here's some reality for the reality underlying all of this for Starmer. And this is the This is Gary Smith of the GMB, as you mentioned.
I think Labour are listening. I think they're listening to us. Cutting off the North Sea oil and gas will simply mean that we will have to import more oil and gas, which is more carbon intensive. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for the environment. And of course, it would be awful in terms of jobs. We have to have a coherent plan to deal with climate change and any energy transition. Wishful thinking on the part of politicians isn't enough. And let me just say, in terms of jobs, the jobs in the renewables industries are by and large getting produced in China, in sovereign oil and gas well-funded backyards in the Middle East. And that is true in England. It's true also in Scotland, where the Greens and the SNP are in power. And actually, the story of the UK economy is we've been exporting jobs, an important virtue, for a long time. And climate change doesn't respect borders. So if we're manufacturing our renewables industries of the future, and indeed a load of manufactured goods producing coal in China, we're going to suffer. And let me just say this. Last year, if we had no gas, we would have had rolling blackouts in this country for 246 days. 26 days, the electricity would have gone off. We're going to need gas for a long time. And in terms of an energy transition, there needs to be a coherent plan which does tackle climate change, is also about jobs and also about national security.
So Gary Smith's been on about this for a while. He's been talking about bourgeois environmentalists and so on and so forth.
Yes, and I mean the key thing here is he's obviously trying to talk some sense into the Labour Party opposition. But as you can see, if viewers can read particularly the bottom half of that quote there, they can see that he's slightly backpedaled, because that sort of gives the impression there, I think probably accurately, that he thinks a bunch of this is absolute rubbish. And I suspect that he knows that renewables, as in solar and wind, cannot deliver reliable and substantive parts of our needed energy on the grid. And therefore he's not mentioned it there, but obviously nuclear is a key answer for sensible, if you like, quotes, old Labour trade unionists. And it just what he says about gas is particularly important. But I think he's trying to sort of caveat it. He's trying to triangulate by kind of taking climate change perhaps more seriously than he did in his initial bourgeois quote. But he is having the digs at the virtue signalling, and you think there is perhaps, maybe not coordinated, but there is definitely this divide opening up in the Labour Party, because sensible people inside the loop with Keir Starmer, and someone like Smith of the GMB, who's probably not necessarily in the loop with Keir Starmer, are pushing to say, look, if you get into government, but also if you make appeals to Labour voters. I mean, I think did it come up last week when it was said someone sensible in the Labour Party was briefing? He says, look, all you need is one oil rig worker on a TV moment during the general election saying they cannot vote Labour because of your ridiculous policy to ban new sources of oil energy, which is the same as gas. You need oil and gas to back up renewables. You need them in of themselves, and certainly you need them if you're going to transition to a majority nuclear power situation, whether that be the new modular reactors or the old school ones as well.
Speaking of transitioning, sort of, Clive Lewis, Labour MP, has made this amendment. I picked on Clive not necessarily because he said anything interesting by himself, apart from he doesn't believe that an oil and gas can provide us with energy security, which is kind of bonkers in itself. And he's put forward these proposals that are just not going to get through the bill. He's chosen to really identify with a TUC activist called. I'm going to try and remember her name or his name, depending on your perspective. But he's been very supportive of this trans mother. I'm not going to comment too much on that either, apart from to point out there is quite a big gulf between this, what's happening here, and the public, and this guy, this mother came to everyone's attention when he or she was chosen to represent motherhood by ITN. So ITN rang up the TUC, and they put forward Mika Mino Paleno. Yes, I think that's how you pronounce it. Who turns out to not just be a TUC activist, but also a climate economics modeler at the TUC. And I'm going to go through this because we've got Alan ready to join us in a moment. But yeah, so the TUC's been really hyper woke, hyper green woke on all this, and it's producing these kind of batshit crazy, if I may put it that strongly, reports suggesting that you can spend 18 billion every year on public transport, and you're going to get this magic 50 billion annual return from it. When they should just admit that public transport is a cost. So it's not just Labour. The unions themselves seem to be torn into two. Is that putting it too strongly?
I think it's pretty clear that the divide that's kind of on the inside and softly and being leaked out and unspoken in the shadow cabinet and amongst the advisors, and obviously that would include unofficially Peter Mandelson, is reflected within, the trade unions Congress, the overall body which represents most trade unions, and the GMB, which has certainly now has a more, if you like, traditional perspective. So that, if you like, I suspect it's a kind of divide between the GMB and most trade union leaderships. Now, as with many other issues, the divide is often between the trade union leadership and the membership. So the membership's one thing, which is more traditionally socialist and traditionally at least working class labor. So in that sense, not necessarily socialist per se. And then you have the leadership that have the more kind of politically correct view. This is slightly different because Smith is a leader of the GMB, and he's probably wanting, like any good trade union leader, to be more reflective of his members. So I suspect across the board, the membership are closer to the Smith General Secretary of the GMB position. But that, for obvious reasons, viewers will know, is not being polled, because to find that out would be a bit inconvenient for most of the trade union leadership. But yeah, that would be my summary take on the whole thing.
So Labour, before they're even in power, seem to be set up with the same kind of disarray as the Tories are after 13 years of power. It's going to be quite it's going to be quite interesting.
We don't know exactly how this divides 60-40 either way, but I think in both leading parties, not so much obviously the Liberal Democrats and certainly not the Greens, but certainly in the Tories and Labour, you've got a lot of people who, to a lesser or greater degree, realizes that at least the way net zero has been attempted, i.e. not by nuclear, but by absurd behavioral change and reliable on wind and solar. I mean, Dale was mentioning with you the other day, putting solar panels on roofs in Britain. I mean, it's just laughable. But the point is much of the political elite quietly know this is, or are starting to realize this is just batshit, as you put it, crazy. Whereas it trying to kind of softly move out of that position. And it's why I think climate debate and supporters and others can actually pressurize in both main political parties. So it forces a move from the more insane, particularly the more insane versions of net zero policies.
Brilliant. Right. Well, going back to other parties and their crazy members, there was Monday so it was last Saturday. There was an edition of the Today programme on the subject of Just Stop Oil's disruption of, I think it was a Wimbledon or some such event, which Patrick O'Flynn had pointed out was between just Chris Packham and John Gummer. Wasn't much of a debate. Both committed environmentalists. And of course, the BBC has a particularly green agenda, and obviously Just Stop Oil has a green agenda. So there was nothing really at stake here. So while I get Alan Miller from the Together Association declaration even on the stream, I'm going to play just a short clip from each of those those men's introduction on the BBC.
We're having a conversation about an action they've taken during a game of tennis when the world is rapidly going to hell in a handcart. And that gives me the opportunity to tell you that what we need to do is transition away from oil and gas exploration and exploitation because we're in a climate crisis. So from their point of view, that's job done. They've drawn attention to the most critical issue that our species has ever faced, when getting media space to do that is very difficult. And we've got to have some perspective here.
But very large numbers of people recognise that we're not doing anything like enough to deal with the worst material danger to civilization and human beings and the whole natural world. Yeah. We really have fallen behind, and we must get on with it.
Alan Miller, thanks very much for joining us. Were you listening to that? Did you hear it? What do you think of? It all sounds very familiar, doesn't it? If we don't sort of let people trample all over our rights, then millions and millions of people are going to die. Alan, you seem to have not got a sound. Oh, hold on. Your mic's muted. Your mic isn't connected.
Mute. Okay, so can you hear me?
There you go. I can hear you now. Yes.
Hi, Ben. Hi, guys. Thanks for having me here. I think it's astonishing that we can have so much catastrophism in rhetoric from people allegedly that want to talk about science. Scientific inquiry, we know from the Copernican revolution, the whole basis of it is about scrutiny, critical engagement, discussing the issues. And now there seems to be this notion that it's a permanent crisis. Be quiet if you have any skepticism or criticism or questions generally. You're now a climate denier. There's just this general term that you're a climate denier. A terribly outrageous claim, actually, because with Holocaust denialism, where it came from, actually trying to pretend that something that actually did happen historically in the past did not happen. Even that should not be banned or censored. It should be discussed and illuminated to be the absolute rubbish that it is. And we've seen a situation that people who allegedly talk about being into science and rigor and data not want to get into the nitty-gritty of the issues. And I think there's a few things. One is that are things happening in the world and with temperatures and a range of different things that have been happening? Yes, they are. Do humans have an impact on the planet and on the ecosystems? Yes, we can, and yes, we do. What is to be done is the question. Now, if you look back over 30 or 40 years, many people know this already, but some of the big claims were that we're going into global cooling, global freezing. If you look at the ever bigger catastrophic kind of speculations, it's not just Al Gore, but it's been happening for quite some time, of which none of those things came true. But we know that there are all sorts of things. People often talk about Bangladeshi silt plains, floodplains. Absolutely. One of the issues is development. Why is it that we don't, in LA or elsewhere, if there is a flood of some kind, why is it that people don't die? There's early warning systems, there's development, there's production, there's a range of technological emergency measures that things can be done. But the other bigger question is, so the development's really important, and our relationship to productivity, wealth creation for everyone, and innovation. The other thing that, you know, seldom gets discussed is that we're presented with this paradigm, with this idea that there's the crisis, is that be quiet, you have to now do all these things to limit, restrict. In fact, the Uxbridge by-election at the moment that's happening, there's a big discussion that's been happening there, which has been precisely this. One of the candidates got up and said, it's just too late to debate any of this now. The science, the data is out, it's all there. And what we all need to do now is walk and cycle if you are concerned about the world. And you see, this is where we've got to, rather than a really rational debate and discussion about how we can organize things, how we can improve, innovate. You know, France has 60% nuclear. Sweden has 35 or 40. You know, there was a prospect where we were doing very well with nuclear energy until Nick Clegg said, with these kind of low horizons and this kind of terrible lack of ambition, well, if we try and get energy independent, it will take us to 2022 to do it. And he said that several years ago, obviously. That embodies this sense of low horizons, this sluggishness towards innovation, transformation, utilizing energy and having some scope. So when this debate between two sets of people that basically share so many assumptions, what it leaves out is the public. And the thing that Together Association, the Together Declaration is so passionate and obsessed with, actually, is since we've seen the things happen in the last few years, not just during COVID, but before that, where the public has been treated with contempt, nudged, sort of treated as though they're stupid, called names, be quiet because the smart people who fly around on jets and in limousines, we're going to organize all this for you. We're going to tell you. And it always boils down to the same thing, limits and restrictions, not how to inspiring ideas of how we can live, how we can transform things, better housing, better infrastructure, new reservoirs, great kind of beauty, right, in our cities and urban development.
So just before, I mean, I see where you're going there, but I think people need to understand just what, I mean, just how I don't know if we've really got to how toxic what Gummer has said is. So I'm just going to play another clip from the interview, and we'll discuss that, because it's I think it's probably one of the worst I've ever heard him come out with, and he's come out with quite a lot. If it's going to play.
There's a perfectly reasonable and sensible way to reach net zero. The Climate Change Committee has shown how you do it. It has shown that it's less than 1% of the gross national product to deliver it. It is not impossible. All three major political parties are committed to it, but the government isn't doing it and the opposition isn't pushing it hard enough. We have got to change the political system if we are going to be able to face down people who want to use some degree of force to do it. Okay. If we don't pick it up, if we don't fight this in a democratic way, then we are going to find ourselves faced with this kind of demonstration, and we're going to have more and more people sympathize with the people who are doing it.
So it's astonishing to me. He's not talking about anyone who disagreed with the climate agenda. There was the government, the opposition, and the Just Stop Oil lot, and they were all in the public and never having been asked. But nonetheless, he thinks we've got to change the politics such that in case Just Stop Oil actually buy guns and start shooting people or some such thing. There's a lot of threat and menace and a lot of nastiness in what Gummer is saying. There's just utter contempt for people there, isn't there? And we need to address that as a matter of urgency.
You made a very important point, which is that there's a consensus amongst the new managerial technocrats that have all bought into this net zero. There are two examples of this. Is one, Mark Harper, who has agreed now, because many of us have been lobbying and campaigning to challenge the underwriting of central government of livable streets and active travel, which, to remind people, is about road closures and bollards. These 15-minute city ideas are really not about investing in local services, but about putting up cameras, fining people, putting up roadblocks. And he says, well, these are divisive, they're a problem, we don't want to fund these things that are anti-car, anti-business, shutting things down, and it will divide people about net zero. So he's still buying into the idea of net zero, which we should remind ourselves is a set of policies which is about suffocating our ability to advance. All the achievements that we've had, how the NHS is paid for people that are very excited about that, in spite of all its limitations, how we have an education system, how we do any of the things, how we travel around, how we're able to, have an advanced civilization, is based on fossil fuels and carbon and the ability and industrialization, all those things. Now, some people say, yeah, but now we've gone too far and we need to limit that. What they're really talking about is increasing a sort of feudalistic approach that limits suffocation, whilst frankly, many other nations, big nations, are not doing that. The other example is Keir Starmer, who on the one hand says a couple of days ago in the Time, he said publicly when his arguments with Miliband, he was saying, we
were just talking about this.
Right, yeah, so I don't actually argue. But then at the same time, he wants to disband the use of North Sea oil, and he's kind of doing a very pragmatic, I want to win votes, it's all about the economy. And actually, the Labour's retreat from Labour and from working people and the concerns of that is epitomised with Sadiq Khan and the ULEZ expansion, and with many local authorities, where, like in Oxford and others, where Labour is at the forefront of limiting, impacting people, some of which, like key workers in Oxford, are being really going to be detrimentally impacted by not just the busgate system, but some of the parking measures that are happening around the hospitals and schools. Utter contempt for the public. This idea that people are going to get guns, they don't need guns, right? It's the same reason we don't need more laws to restrict and regulate them. What we needed was a commitment to uphold the laws that currently exist, not to tie up our whole civil liberties with even more limits and restrictions. And what we actually need is some honesty, right? And now the good thing about all of this, though, Ben, is that there's been a real sea change. And I think that, like we've seen in Germany with many who put up, went along with some of the German eco ideas, if we remind ourselves, has been prevalent from the 70s, has been in mainstream politics for a long time in Germany. But the issues of heaters and boilers has been huge, and there's been a revolt in Germany against it. We've seen that in the Netherlands, the farmers of the BBB with these kind of measures of allegedly environmental measures to impose all sorts of things around pesticides and others. Massive reaction, the public supporting them, a new political party really expanding, hugely important. In the same way, net zero, this is Britain's response. So people are saying, if you ask them, do they want to have a nice environment or do they want nice air? Of course, people will say yes, everyone. If you say, do you want to have wage cuts, power cuts, polluted water from lack of investment in infrastructure, less money, your business shut down, and not see your family, they'll all say no. And this is what's happening now. And these new divisions that are occurring, it's not about left and right, and much more now it's about ordinary people saying, this is what we need. And we're not going to have low traffic neighborhoods and limits. We're not going to have this on this permanent state of emergency crisis, ULEZ expansion. We don't want these measures where you fly around in jets and limousines and you tell us, about how we all have to change our behavior whilst you're not going to. And I think there's a very exciting moment in Britain now where many of us, and I'd invite people to get involved in challenging it and participate, because actually a lot of people think there's these things that are happening that are out of their control. What we're trying to advocate is the more we can have a stance and have a relationship and we can have an impact. And 3 things that have happened in the last 2 weeks reflect that. Mark Harper's stepping away from active travel, livable streets funding. The response to the Treasury around cash, CBDCs, 50,000 people in there, they're having to review all that. It's very important. And also the issue of banks closing down people's accounts, and a massive kickback against that. That's just some of the things more recently. We can have an influence and an impact. We know that's happening around ULEZ as well. And I'd encourage everyone to get involved in that.
So essentially what we're saying, I think, is there are more of us than there are of them. Even if they've got lots of money and they've got Just Stop Oil and they're very well organised, it's us. We've got exactly the same capacity to act in our own interests. I know you've got to go, so I suggest everyone follows Alan on social media and follows Together and supports Together. I have been, and more to be announced on that front. We're working with Together Climate Debate UK to try and sort of put a bit more sensible opposition to what may be heard in the mainstream. Right. On that note, thank you very much to Alan.
Thank you.
On.
Thank you,
Thank
Ben.
you.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
guys. All the best.
Now, if you can remember COP26, that far back, here's a conversation I invented, excuse me, between Mark Carney and George Monbiot.
Basically, the financial system held a mirror to the climate crisis.
What protest does is to hold a mirror up to society.
These seemingly arcane but essential changes to the plumbing of finance can move and are moving climate change from the fringes to the forefront and transforming the financial system.
We need systemic change.
Banks, insurers, pension funds, asset managers, export credit agencies, stock exchanges, credit rating agencies, index providers, auditors.
That is an essential step towards change.
So make no mistake, the money is here.
System change, not climate change.
Thank you very much.
So that was Mark Carney and George Monbiot. Mark Carney, of course, used to be governor of the Bank of England, and I think some might say he has something to answer for, given the state of the economy at the moment. But so to discuss all that and more, I am joined by economist Catherine McBride, and if I can get the slides ready. Yes, thank you. Hello, Catherine. Thanks for joining us. Is your microphone working? That's the question. No. This never happens to GB News. No. Hello. Still no. Should I bring Ed in? And me and Ed, would you sort it out, and me and Ed will have a chat. Give me a wave when you get the mic working. So Ed, what do you think Mark Carney would make of all these Just Stop Oil antics? I was trying to juxtapose, as it were, being a bit pretentious about it, George Monbiot and Mark Carney's conversation. Mark Carney wants to adjust the financial system, and George Monbiot and his pals at Just Stop Oil want to adjust what they imagine the political system is. So what's going on in their heads, do you reckon?
Well, it reminds me of I can't remember if it's a Gramsci quote where it's something like this in the the state Marxist system, the ones with the political power have all the money, and in the capitalist system, the ones with all the money have all the political power. And obviously it's not as simple as that, but I think the point is that one of the reasons you've got the hive mind on all of this is because this is where the financial interest lies now. Contra to the commonly held view that it's, the fossil fuel companies of kind of funding everything, and they're working behind the scenes, and that's why they're still kind of powering so much of the energy. No, the reality is they're just living off the practical reality that has to be the case. Otherwise, everyone's, heating and light gets switched off. And in fact, that may be why the hydrocarbon companies aren't funding as much political lobbying and so on and so forth as you might expect, or in fact, none at all. Is because, they can quite happily make money selling their product that they need to sell because it's essential for countries to buy their product, because wind and solar is just, on current technologies, is never going to do it. So, but Mark Carney specifically, I think he is just very much, he's just he's received his orders from the political powers and the financial powers that be, and he's just orchestrating what he needs to do. Now, I mean, he was appointed by George Osborne, which kind of brings it back to Just Stop Oil waving orange glitter at George Osborne at his wedding. So thankfully it wasn't orange paint or orange dust. But you have to see. I quite like that biting back George Osborne although I wouldn't wish to see any such thing happen to his or anyone else's wedding, no matter how much I politically oppose them. But it is kind of ironic that he was the appointee of Mark Carney, and of course nothing anyone does, even as revolutionary as what's happening globally on the financial level, it's still not enough for the extremist activists. But I'm hoping we can hear Catherine now, because obviously she
Catherine, are you here? Oh, still we can't hear you.
She
Should we try? Is there any unmuting?
No, she's unmuted. It's just no. We can't hear you, Catherine.
This is the edit mics. No.
That's one of the,
Catherine, if you have a settings cog, there may be a cog at the bottom of your screen on this interface, and if you click on that, you may get to choose your audio, and then you can choose your mic.
I think she's on a mobile phone, which may be the issue.
Right.
But typically, that's what's probably flummoxed her, because it just mobile phones and those earphone mics normally just work straight away. So.
Right. Well, maybe we should have an interview with Catherine as a separate, because we're coming up to an hour. Maybe we could just have a separate meeting, and we'll put that online later on in the week, because there was a lot of good stuff to discuss with Catherine. Oh, see, she's back now. Are you with us, or have you still got no mic? Still no mic. Okay. So I'm going to rush through the slides to see if I can find what we were going to talk about. Yeah. I think this is where we were going to end up, and this is something we mentioned last week, that there was the budgets that the even financial organizations are talking about are in the order of 200 trillion, and at the level of the European Union, the European continent even, that looks like 700 billion. I'm not sure how if those two figures are necessarily produced according to the same metric, but that's going to be an enormous undertaking. By my calculations, the 200 trillion is equivalent to 2 years of everyone of GDP per capita. Everyone, the entire world, working for 2 years non-stop just towards the climate agenda, which is clearly not something feasible. I'm just going to try one more. No, Catherine's gone. So with that, thanks very much for joining, everyone, and thanks very much for watching. If you've enjoyed the stream and our website, despite all of these gremlins that we keep having, then please do consider supporting us. We're not just doing a live stream and making a website. We've been writing reports, we've been doing research, we've been talking to journalists, helping them and others understand these issues, and we have lots more planned for the future. So with that, I will try and leave the final words to another Big Ben. Thanks very much, and good night.